Yo, what's up, guys? So lately I've just been processing through what happens when God says yes, what happens when God says no, and what happens when God says wait. And is He still good in the midst of all of those? And the short answer is yes. You know, and in my last video, I had help from my buddy James, and he just shared with us a moment when God said yes to him, a moment when God showed up, and a moment when God provided. And how incredible is that? Because anytime God blesses us, it's such a good feeling. It's encouraging not only for us, but when we tell people, it's encouraging to hear about moments when God blesses other people. The hard reality for me lately is I'm learning to back up my standpoint that God is still good in the midst of waiting. And so something that just been really convicting me lately is the idea of as a leader, are you living what you're preaching or teaching? And so especially when it comes to church leadership, we can identify so many churches and so many pastors who get up on a Sunday morning and they give a really awesome message. But then when we look at their life, we don't really see it reflected. We don't really see them following what they're saying. And so if they're not willing to follow what they're saying, why should we? And it's no different being in youth ministry right now. If I get up on a Sunday night in front of our students and I say, hey, it's important to follow Jesus, it's important to get into His Word, but yet I don't take the time to get into His Word and just to pursue a relationship with Him, why should they? It's like asking a friend to do something and being like, oh, this would be so good for you. You should totally do it. But then you yourself don't care about it enough to do it. Why should they trust us? Why should they trust us that it's that good? And so anyway, one way that I want to break free of that. That's not the type of leader I want to be. And it's not the type of leader I believe God calls us to be. And one of the things that I've just been talking about a lot lately in our youth group is the power of our story. And the fact that testimony and sharing our story could be our life story, how we got to where we are, or it could be just the everyday things that God is doing in our life. And students have been sharing some awesome testimonies, and I'm loving getting to hear that. But I want to also be the type of person and the type of leader that can back up what I'm encouraging them to do. And so for me lately, to be honest, life has just been challenging. For me, God has been telling me to wait, and that's really, really hard. Just dealing with old feelings that I left unchecked, dealing with changes that are coming, dealing with who's going to be in my life, who isn't, and that's really, really hard. And I've said it in other videos, but I think it's still true. I think there's a misconception that when you follow Jesus and when you're a Christian, that you have to have it all together all the time. And it's just not true. Like, everybody is broken. Every single one of us is broken, and we face hard times. But it's what you do out of that. And so for me, there's been moments where I just want to run. I just want to break down. I want to be alone, away from everybody. I want to just be able to get away from everything. But I know that that's not always the healthiest. Now, it is important sometimes just to get away from situations and spend some time to yourself just with Jesus and hash some things out, to let your mind be able to process. And that's so beautiful. But you can't stay isolated, because isolation will eventually just continue to worsen the problem. And so for me, as I'm praying through these big life decisions of what's going to happen in my life and where I'm going to go, God keeps telling me to be patient and to wait and to be still and know that He's God. And sometimes I find myself asking, God, how can I sit and wait? How can I go through this when you could give me an answer? Like, you're God. How can you expect me to just be still right now when I'm facing something, when I'm hurting, when I'm struggling? And I get reminded constantly of James 1, of just consider it pure joy when we face trials of many kinds, because we know that the testing of our faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work in us, so that we may be mature, not lacking anything. And, like, for example, if anybody anybody had the right to be down on his luck, bummed out, it's Paul, the dude who wrote a ton in the New Testament. The dude was thrown in jail constantly, but yet it didn't stop him from doing what God was calling him to do, and it didn't stop him from having joy, because he just knew where his identity lied, and he had faith that God was going to do whatever was best for him and was going to take care of him in the midst of all that. And I think about in this idea of waiting, I think about David in the Old Testament. David he was anointed as king as a really young dude, and ideally, how the story would go is he would go straight to the palace and take over, right? But that's not what happened. He actually got anointed as king, and then went back and finished his duties as a shepherd. Like, he had to wait. Then God let him go into the temple and play the harp for King Saul. And then he became part of the army, and then ended up leading the army. And then eventually, even after a ton of chances to take Saul out, David still waited until God said go. And I can't imagine that. I can't imagine being anointed as king and waiting so long before I actually became king. But David had faith that God was preparing him, that he was doing something big in his life, and that waiting would eventually pay off, because God already said that he was king. God already had anointed him, and so it wasn't his job to go before God and to do things. And so that's where I'm stuck right now. God's been telling me so many good things. God's been encouraging me in so many ways, but I'm not there yet. I'm still in that waiting period. I'm still waiting to see what God's about to do. And the hardest part about that is I have to just be obedient to what God's saying right now. Obedient to the small things, obedient to the daily things. And it's not easy, because I want to be where God says I'm going to be. But how much more beautiful is where God says I'm going to be if I can be patient now and keep learning, keep growing, and letting perseverance bring me to maturity. And that's the beautiful thing about God, is we're constantly learning and constantly growing. But I hope that's encouraging to you right now, to realize, number one, it's okay to be stuck in the wait. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to not have it all together all the time, because we have a Father who's a perfect healer, a perfect restorer, and we're all broken. Like, we don't have to hide behind our brokenness or hide our brokenness from other people, because when we start opening up about our brokenness to those we trust and we start moving out, that's where freedom comes from. Like, that's when moments where we realize we're actually not alone. We don't have to hide in isolation. But we realize that God is good in the middle of the wait, because he's actually doing something so much bigger than what we can see and what we perceive. So I just want to encourage you that even if you're stuck in the wait, keep going. Keep pushing forward. Keep doing the simple things day to day that God is telling you to do and encouraging you to do, because he's not done with you yet. He's still finishing up the work. He's still going before you to prepare things that you could never imagine and never dream of.